All right, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar on security controls and remote access and why it's super important. Just want to thank everybody for joining us today. On our panel today, I have Rocky with me. Rocky, go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, I'm Rocky Leisher. I'm a channel enablement manager with Kaseya, working with MSPs to help them with their sales and marketing. And I worked prior to that for an MSP for multiple years.
Great, thank you. My name is Joshua Holloway. I'm the CEO for Seventh Dimension. We put these webinars on about every other month, and we're just looking to bring information that most people are not thinking to ask, or what they're worried about in the back of their mind, and maybe they just haven't thought to ask who their current IT provider is, whether it's us or somebody else, on how some of these things are super important. Rocky, thank you so much for making it out today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So overall, we're looking at the threatscape, if you will, out there, what remote users are facing, what businesses should be doing to protect their remote users, because I know bring your own device is super popular, and a lot of people think that because you get to bring your own device, everything is fine, everything's okay. Maybe it's more of an ostrich head in the sand situation, but that's not the case, right? Rocky, what are your thoughts on that one?
You always have to be cautious of that, because you don't know what that computer has or device has been done in the past on the internet or whatever activities. So there could be malicious activities already on the device when it hooks onto your network, and you're liable once it's on your network.
Yeah, and I think a lot of businesses don't think about that liability and what that brings. Yes, the cost savings is there for them getting to use their own devices, but all in all, at the end of the day, it's going to be more expensive, because when it comes down to compliancy and it comes to remote access, there's certain rules, regulations that have to be followed, and a personal device that maybe a child has used or another member of the household has used, that's a huge no. And those are a lot of things that people aren't thinking about, especially when it comes to like CMMC or HIPAA compliancy. And I know we're talking about the overall remote access. There's a couple of statistics here on the screen for everybody to kind of look at. And it's a pretty high statistic as far as the number of people who are allowed to work from home. We know that COVID changed these numbers drastically. 2 years ago, everybody woke up one morning and everybody had to work from home. That was a huge issue. I crashed Microsoft for the first half of the day when everybody went to Teams. Now everybody's kind of caught up. We're starting to see businesses want to bring people back into the business, away from the home, into their threatscape of the business, right? Let's get everybody inside. Let's work together. Let's see each other. I mean, Elon from Musk himself sent an email out to Tesla saying, "You're in 40 hours a week. Time to come into the office." And I think we're going to start to see that, but people are still going to periodically have to work from home, or larger industries are going to continue to allow their employees to work from home. And it's just super important that we make sure that we have all of the policies and the procedures in place. I know we've used this slide before, and we like to use this slide because really at the end of the day, this is how everybody's attacked, right? The biggest one being phishing. This all boils down to policies and training. People are susceptible to phishing because it's a mental attack or psychological attack versus I just got into the computer in the background and I loaded an application. It's the cyber attacker who comes in through a psychological attack that's the most dangerous, because nobody's really going to notice them until they violate a rule. And a lot of these attacks are 30 to 90 days in the making. So it's super imperative to understand why training and having good policies in place and following your compliances, which we'll get to here in a bit, are tantamount to why cybersecurity exists, why we're here to protect everybody. Rocky, you have anything to add to that?
No, other than just this is a classic slide to show that, because for compromised credentials, almost 75% are just in phishing attempts and compromised or stolen credentials. So that's huge.
Yeah, and that's asking everybody to get away from using password 1234 or Starbucks 29. That was my favorite. I always come across Starbucks for some reason. Not only are they a popular drink, they're also a popular password. One last little thing we're going to hit on before we get into the compliancy is like, what is the anatomy of a phishing attack, right? If you're looking at the slide, you really want to look at, does that person typically speak that way? If I hit reply, is the address standard company address that I'm used to? Are they creating a sense of urgency? That's the biggest thing, right? We as humans, when we have pressure laid upon us, our reactionary is heightened. We don't necessarily think everything through properly. We just happen to have an answer. So we throw it out there. It may not be the right one. That's what these psychological attacks are doing, is they're saying, we're going to call you to action. We're not going to allow you to stop and think about this because I'm the CEO and I'm asking for all this data and I need this. Now, the funny ones are, of course, when the CEO reaches out and says, hey, I need $20,000 in gift cards and we're going to deliver them. Those ones are a little bit easier to spot, but it's always really good to be looking at, fake email addresses. How generic is it? Never click the links. And is there a sense of urgency being brought up? Do you have anything to add to that, Rocky?
Other than going to the source, if you're unsure when you see it, you catch any of the indicators that Josh just pointed out, make sure that you go to the source. In this example, it's a HR department. Contact them.
So I had a client, they got an email to send about $100,000 and to wire it, and they did, but they caught it. I don't even know how they caught it, but they caught it. And they came to me and they were just like, hey, what can we do in the future so that we're not susceptible to this? Obviously, they started doing training. That was one big thing. The other thing was, I was like, let's think about your standards, your policies, right? If somebody's coming out to you, whether you know them or not, a simple policy we can put in place is reach out to the person and just say, hey, I'm about to wire you X amount of dollars. Is this what you asked for? And has any of your banking information changed? Or is this the correct banking information? I get that that's probably a 5-10 minute phone call, but that 5-10 minute phone call outweighs the company losing potentially $100,000, $50,000, $10,000. And that's definitely something to be looking out for. So now we're going to get into the compliancy and the regulations. Every industry in some manner is having a regulation or has had a regulation applied to them. So you have like ISO certifications. The biggest one that everybody kind of talks about is HIPAA. The next biggest one is CMMC. We know GDPR from Europe has been really big because those ideas are starting to come over to our side with like New York, California putting compliancies in place, NIST compliancies. I know that the federal government's looking to make CMMC a standard across all businesses, but they're currently testing that out with the military. So anytime you work with the federal government, CMMC and NIST are your primaries. I know for Rocky, you probably see that a lot with the compliancy stuff you're doing on the Kaseya side.
Constantly, and it's like you said, it's growing. It's just moving up the timeline on the CMMC. They're now saying that they're going to have it in place by May of next year. So we'll see if the time standard holds up, because it has been pushed off once before, but that's their goal.
And I know with the CMMC, it's always changing. I think it was a couple months ago, it was a 5-tier system. It's now a 3-tier system. If you were once like CMMC level 3, or a 5, that's a 3 turned into a 2 and a 5 turned into a 3. And they're still trying to figure out your rules and regulations, but they still want you to be CMMC certified ready, which is weird because the rules and regulations change all the time. Now, there's certain compliancies that have been around a lot longer than CMMC. The one biggest one I think I probably want to hit on the most is HIPAA, right? So that's medical record information. This pertains to every one of us because at one time in our lives, we're going to see a doctor, right? And it's imperative that doctors' offices, the practices themselves follow all the HIPAA guidelines. It's very imperative that any IT service provider who is providing services to these type, that they realize that they're legally liable and have to be doing what they're supposed to the guidelines of HIPAA to protect themselves. Because in the event that there is a spillage or data is breached or somebody makes a HIPAA complaint, it's not just the doctor and the doctor's insurances that are held liable any longer. the MSP or the IT service provider is held liable as well. So if the IT service provider did something wrong and the doctor had a leakage, everybody gets sued, right? So, and that's $50,000 an instance. That's super expensive. Nobody wants those kind of bills. So it's important to look at the guidelines and follow them. Same thing with like ISO certification, PCI. Everybody takes credit cards, right? So to PCI compliance, you know, is everybody following everything that needs to be? Separate networks, administering the cards, not keeping them open. And what some people know or don't know is employees may have those cards in a Word doc, an Excel doc, and they think, oh, well, I password encrypted the Excel doc. They don't realize that that password encryption can be bypassed in 30 to 60 seconds. Rocky, for that one, do you guys get a lot of questions on how to govern some of these compliances, or what are you seeing out there?
Yes, constantly. We have people asking questions on how we should approach it. You know, what do we need to have in place? How do we know where we're lacking and where we need to fill the gaps? So yes, there's a lot of uncertainty when people come to us, and it's something where you have to be compliant. It's not, you know, an option, it's mandatory.
All right. Okay. No, it's perfect. I guess when we get started with compliancy, typically that's around data protection. Data protection can be internal IP, so intellectual property, or medical records, PHI. And then you have PII, personal identifying information or identification information. PII, we typically see leakage for that. That's internal employees, socials, addresses, maybe their salary, things like that. All of that has to be protected by the businesses. And sometimes a simple internal, external vulnerability scan or network scan can be done, and that can be pointed out that there is a leakage of PII. Monitoring the dark web, that lets us know anytime passwords are compromised, and sometimes there's a leakage of the PII information on that person. So those are super important to do, and be talking to your IT provider on whether they're monitoring that information and they're looking for that information. On the confidentiality, that boils down to, is your provider auditing your network security, auditing your folder and file security? Integrity is making sure that everybody who's logged out should be, and is the data always available? I know last month we gave a webinar on backing up Office 365 and G Suite because Microsoft and Google both said it's not our problem. That goes back to having a good backup, right? So make sure that at least that data is always available and recoverable in the event of a disaster, because in some cases, you could potentially be sued for loss of data. You have anything on that one, Rocky, on the integrity or confidentiality?
No, other than, you know, the integrity part even has to do with altering or destroying. It's got to be done in a proper fashion. So you can't just throw it in your trash can or your next trash bag and have it go. It's got to be done a certain way to be compliant.
That is true. Yeah. And that boils down to what compliances do you fall under, right? I know financial firms, they have a little bit of HIPAA because of the amount of financial data that they hold on to, and there's set limits to how long you have to hold on to that info in almost all businesses. There's destruction. Are you putting in a recycle bin, and have your employees been properly trained? And that boils down to like a clean desk policy, or a clean desk and data destruction policy. Once again, that's all compliance, right? We as employees are complying with the fact that we have to destroy data properly. I know in an IT world, for us, we always walk around with thumb drives and portable hard drives, and we're backing up people's computers, and we're saving copies of data. And then all of a sudden, you'll end up with a laptop bag like mine that has 36 USB drives and 2 or 3 portable hard drives in it, and I become a layer of liability because am I following my standard procedures for wiping a drive every time? That's a standard company policy right there, and that's compliance. Like, I'm complying to that and saying yes every time USB drives are wiped, hard drives are wiped, and then if I don't need them anymore, if they become quirky in the way that they work, I destroy them. I physically destroy them. And that's just all of the compliances that we have to follow. So for my business, we operate at a CMMC level 2 basic structure. And so there's a lot of different things that we have to jump through. And that's just because of the types of clients that we take on. For other people, they don't have to worry about that level of complexity yet. They just have to worry about what they're doing for their businesses.
Yeah, and Josh, just to add to that, as I mentioned earlier, it's mandatory, but it's mandatory whether they're working centralized at the office or remotely. It does not matter where you're working. They have to be compliant. And the burden of the compliance falls directly on the business. So they have to take the policies and procedures and have them in place and make sure that they're being followed.
Yeah, so and that's perfect for this next slide because, first thing, are we doing risk assessment, ongoing monitoring? That is pretty much almost as normal to IT services as can you break my desk, or can you fix my desktop and fix my laptop and fix my server? Now it's, can you do those things, and are you taking risk assessments and monitoring in a constant fashion? That one's super, super important. And I don't know if a lot of IT businesses are necessarily doing that, but that one is high on our list. The next one would be like your remote access. So I'm going to kind of merge, BYOD, because we talked about it, right? Bring your own devices. How much control does the business have over that device? And should they even be allowing people to use their own devices? In a lot of cases, I'm going to argue against it because you don't know if they kept their antivirus up and up to date. You don't know who else is using that computer. Everybody, especially people who have kids and they let their kids on those systems. What they don't realize is kids are clickers. They don't care. They just want it to work. I've watched my son take out a computer in like an hour because he wanted to click on everything, and he ended up loading so much spyware from trying to download one single thing that it was atrocious. Thank God it was a personal home computer and not a work computer. But it's those cases that come up and make these policies even more important. The next is securing your VPN or having secure access to data. How is that data being accessed? How is the data being treated when they're remote? And is all of this written in a policy or a procedure so that you have something to fall back on? And then I guess the last one to that would be training, regular security awareness training. I know for our clients, we offer something as simple as a 3-minute video every week that talks about good password policies, how to identify phishing, clean desk, even though that's kind of odd because all we work on is computers, but a clean desk is actually super important. So various things like that, all the way up to certification-based testing where it's a 60-minute training, and at the end you have to take a full secure certification test. And I think, for you guys on your side, Rocky, you guys have a lot of those things in place as well, and you offer them too.
Yes, we do. We have the security awareness training, and you have to use security awareness training as a tool to help your employees, because without that, they are a weak link in your company, and the more training you get them, they're going to be security conscious. They're going to become another layer of defense for you to have in your company to keep the cyber criminals out.
No, that's yeah. Policies, procedures, compliance, all of that stuff is super important. And it's the tools and the systems in place, right? So we're trying to mitigate or ask our clients to look at how can we help mitigate unauthorized access and exposure, accidental loss or destruction of the data. And is it a disruption and is it causing downtime, which is dollars, right? If an employee is sitting there because their local system got ransomware, not only are you taking into account what money they would bring in for that day, but also their cost burden, right? They're just sitting there twiddling their thumbs, waiting for IT. Having good, strong policies, procedures, and training helps mitigate that, which helps keep your IT costs down and your productivity up. More, productive employees mean more money flowing through the door. And I think I'm trying to beat that one home the most, because a little bit of extra work on the front end makes for longevity on the back end, and everybody's just accustomed to all these rules and regulations, the policies, the procedures, business owners start to understand. And I think, Rocky, too, to that one, a lot of business owners shy away from policies and procedures until they get hit. It's almost like a cyber liability policy, right? They'll fight you tooth and nail to get one because it's money out of their pocket, but then they want it the moment something happens, which means they're not eligible anyways.
Exactly. They are already behind the 8 ball with that, and the question they have to ask themselves even beforehand is, if you did have a data breach or some type of leak occur in your company, what's your plan to get back up and running to be in the game? Because, in many small businesses, a few days could make the difference between survival or not.
Yeah, and the other thing is a good disaster recovery policy. Like, you nailed it on that one. Like, how soon do we need to recover? I know most business owners would like to never have a downtime and be recovered in about 5 minutes, but data recovery has to be a realistic conversation. Does it have to be back up in a day? Does it have to be back up in 4 hours? I had a client that if a disaster hit between Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, and that disaster lasted longer than 4 hours, it could potentially cost them $30 million. My recoverability was 1 hour for them. Thank God I never used it. But to that amount, I was scared knowing, because I asked that question. I'm like, hey, what is it going to cost your downtime? And then they told me, and I said, okay, well, it's probably worth X to save you from losing Y. And this is, and you can see the value in X, right? Well, it's time to see the value in the policies and the procedures, having good disaster recovery, because there's a fallout to it. There truly is a fallout to it. So here's where we're talking about remote access. Overall, what that means to everybody. There's an administrative part to it, right? Writing the policies, the procedures, having the right things in place. Do we allow bring your own device, and is there a policy for that? Does that mean that you hold the employee accountable for, having proper antivirus, having anti-spyware? Or do you make them install the tools that you use, where you say, hey, sorry, you can't bring your own device, you have to use ours? The physical, that gets into your physical realm. And then obviously the technical aspect of it is the tools that we deploy to protect them. Anything you want to add to that one, Rocky?
Other than the fact that, depending on who you need to have on your, to have remote access on your network, you need to make sure that all the policies and procedures are being followed, so the controls are in place to protect the data, because a lot of the controls that you put in place will cover multiple standards or regulations if they're implemented correctly.
No, that's perfect. Yeah. So if anybody's sitting down to figure out what it is or how to get started, or what kind of compliancy concerns that I should be having based on my business type, well, one, a good person to ask would be the owner. If you are the owner, the other person that you should be asking is your attorney, and then most likely your IT service provider. Like, are they doing everything that they should to be protecting you, and does that fall within your compliance? You may want to put together a team or a structure to it. Here's a great way to look at it. With the security management process, identifying risks and potential problems. Is VPNing an issue? Is utilizing SharePoint an issue? Here's a good one, Dropbox, right? Can my business be sued for the use of Dropbox? And sometimes yes, sometimes no, depending on what your compliancy checks are. And is it okay to have that data? Well, Dropbox has been hacked a couple of times. That hasn't happened recently, but can we put faith or trust into something like that? Not to call out Dropbox. Hopefully I don't get a letter from them. Almost all major companies in some level have a breach. So that would be my disclaimer, right? Have good, strong passwords, change them often, right? The other important one is if you have an IT service provider, who is their go-to or their dedicated personnel so that they can have these planning type meetings. Typically, if an IT service provider is advanced enough to say, hey, we have to talk about these policies, these procedures, they're advanced enough to work with the client side and who that contact is going to be, and coming up with these policies and procedures and then rolling them out to the employees. And then, how is all that data being accessed? And are we properly training all of those people to do it? And then how often is it checked? I know for ISO certification, CMMC, NIST compliancy, there's monthly checks, there's bi-monthly, quarterly, biannual, and annual checks that we have to do for our compliancies. If you don't do them, you can be considered out of compliance. And I'm pretty sure you've heard some war stories on that one. Rocky, you have on that?
Yeah, because bottom line, you have to have the continuous monitoring and assessments done on a regular basis, because you can be compliant one day and not the next. Yeah. So you need to have that to where, they can be identified and reacted to quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, and to that case too, like I'm not a lawyer, I may play one on TV, but I'm not one. You really have to be talking to your attorney and saying, like, if we fall out of compliancy, what does that look like for us as a business? If we constantly, and here's the other thing, most likely your attorney is going to say, if you always have a plan of action or a set plan of action or set policies and procedures, that looks a lot better, because at least you can fall back on them, to where like you may fall out of compliancy one day, but because you have an audit procedure, you can fall back onto that saying, well, our audit actually occurs every month. Yes, this happened in between those two periods, but we were monitoring for this and this didn't come up until like 3 days later. So that can be argumentative, or that could be argued in a court of law, protecting the company, mitigating the risk or any costs. Other things to consider is the different types of security and security access for your compliancy. The tougher the compliancy, the more physical security that you have to provide, as well as digital or your system-based security. I know for this one's always fun. I love the cards. Rocky, do you guys have to use cards to swipe in and out of your office when you go in?
Well, actually, I work remotely.
Okay,
ironically. So, but I believe they do at the corporate office. Yes.
Yeah. So depending on your compliancies, they may require RFID cards to get in and out of the door. I know there's certain facilities I have to RFID tag into the server room, tag out. I have to sign in, sign out. That goes back to the compliancies you have to follow and what data you have to track. If it's a school, right, there's rules and regulations to protecting the children. They have to track all bodies who walk on campus, when they got there, when they leave, what's locked down. It's the same thing. On a digital platform, those rules for children fall over on the digital side. And what is IT doing based on compliancy to protect them, right? Like, we don't want a kid to pick up a Chromebook and automatically go to a horrible website, whatever that site may be. It's our job and a part of compliancy and why we follow it, that we hit those nails on the head and make sure that doesn't happen, right? We have to protect the kids. For us, it's digitally. For the school, it's digitally and physically. Same thing with any other compliancies that are out there. All right. Going back to this one, Rocky, on the technical controls, do you have anything else to add on this one overall in general?
On the technical controls, other than they allow you to watch out for or avoid the pitfalls in compliance regarding to the data, they have there's always challenges for the companies or healthcare providers, whatever the case may be. So you need to avoid the potential risk any way possible. And by having these what's listed on the screen in place, it's going to allow you to have that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of boils down to, in a data sense, has everybody gained access to the HR folder or the payroll folder, right? That's a simple one, right? Nobody should have access except for people who are cleared. Employees come and go. Employees are promoted, demoted. They move around. They get different jobs. A good assessment would show employee A, who once was maybe in HR, got pushed over to payroll, and they have access to both, and they should no longer have access to HR. So it's super important that those security measures are tested and then revoked. And that comes down to, is the client sharing the proper information with their IT department or service provider? And are they performing their duties by removing those group security policies and adhering to compliancy?
Yeah, because it can be as basic as a unique password or username, two-factor or multi-factor authentication, or just an automatic log off. When you are away from your machine, it automatically logs off, so nobody can gain access to your system.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think that the biggest thing is whoever you're working with, whether it's internal IT or an outside provider, make sure that they're always working towards being the subject matter expert, specialist in that field. Do they understand how to identify any issues, any threats? How do they respond to known new threats? What do they put in place to protect the employees, and what information they're sharing with the employees to improve their training, to improve who they are as an employee? I think it's super important that even if it's 3 minutes a week, for the safety of the company, to maintain their compliancy, it's important there's some training done. And I know for cyber liability insurance, which I'm just getting ready to review another policy for another client of ours, it is, man, you got to follow that thing to a T. Cyber policies are insane, that if you miss one thing, they're not going to back you in the event of a breach. And your IT provider or department, that's their next job. Like, that's the next important thing. And I think that's where like a compliancy as a service comes in, where your IT provider, or maybe a third party outside of your IT provider, because they choose not to do that, having like compliancy as a service based on your business type is super important, right? Are you following everything? Do you have all the policies and procedures? Do you have everything to a guideline? So if you were to walk out, get a cyber liability policy, not only would you get the best price, but you would already be covered. And all you have to do is do your biannual checks. Because I've read several of these cyber liability policies, and they're written to not fund you. They want to make sure that you've done everything you can. And a lot of them say, have you trained your employees? A lot of them say, do you have these policies? And some of these policies are super simple. Acceptable use policy. You put a splash screen up on everybody's login screen that states that this is our acceptable use. And by clicking OK, you're agreeing to our acceptable use policy every time you log into our system, which is probably why I'd argue against a BYOD solution, because you can't necessarily force that onto an employee's personal device. You have no legal right.
Very true.
All right. Yeah, this goes back to the cyber liability policy, but these are standard good policies to have in a business, right? We've talked about secure VPN. I can't think of any breaches or anything where somebody's VPN was ever hacked or somebody pretended to be somebody else, but it's possible. It happens. Here's a good one. I like this one: secure wireless at home. I don't know about anybody other than myself, but I get a new router. I put in my own routers in my home. I change default passwords, and I change the name of the wireless, and I change the password. And that's pretty much how I start. The ones I think, most people get, like, I don't even want to name ISPs, but you get your internet connection, they provide you a router and your wireless, and you just go on about your business because, your wireless was easy and the password is a sticker on the side of the router. Is it hackable? Anything, if somebody given enough time, yeah, it's hackable. I think the other one too is encrypting devices, right? There's ways to encrypt your hard drive with BitLocker, super simple through Microsoft, as long as you have the right licenses. The other one is thumb drives. Are you encrypting your thumb drives? Do you have some kind of vault on a thumb drive? So if I was to drop it or leave it outside or something and somebody was to pick it up, take it, and it had personal information on it, there was a data breach, data leakage. So what we're doing to protect all of those. Timing out the screen. I know employees hate this one. Actually, I think a lot of times employees hate anything that just disrupts their day. But if they get up and walk away, does the screen time out? Can somebody come in behind them and run it? I know there's an old Sandra Bullock movie where she was a quasi hacker. I'm dating myself on this one, and that's what she did. She snuck into a building. She convinced the employee to leave her desk, and when she left by pulling the fire alarm, she came in, snuck in, sat down at the desk. And I know this all sounds CIA, covert office, but if you think about it, in a normal business, that's possible. Anything's possible. Can somebody, even without the fire alarm being pulled, somebody walks away for an hour, they sit down at their desk. Think of it like a disgruntled employee. I don't like employee B. They get up and leave. I pull up an email. I write a letter to all the clients, or I write a letter to the CEO, and I tell them how I feel. But it looks like it came from the other person. That could destroy a company. That can cause a compliance investigation because they reached out to the clients. Anything is possible. They may even, they reached out to the clients and they said, hey, we're not protecting your data, or hey, we're selling your data, or it's very easy to steal this information, and somebody submits a HIPAA claim. You got to protect yourself. Rocky, you have anything on that one?
These are all essential measures that you have to implement or maintain on your own to help ensure that the proper security is in place to satisfy any of the regulations to be compliant. I guess the number one thing I could do is offer free advice to give this slide to all your employees, because if this would show them that everything is done to help them and protect them as well.
And I think we're releasing this slide deck. So yeah, they have that opportunity to take that slide and share it with their employees, and share it with their IT providers. And if their IT providers are not already trying to hit these things, maybe it's time to look around. All right, I know we're coming. We pretty much come up to the end of it, guys. It's super important that compliancy is followed. It's super important that you as a business owner understand your compliances, rules, regulations, everything to a T. And then your vendors, people who are coming in to work on your networks, coming to work on all of your stuff, your employees, that they understand what compliancy means and what it is that they have to follow, including your IT service providers, because a lot of times we're some of the largest targets now because hackers know that we have access to a whole swath of networks, a whole swath of data. And why not hack an MSP and try and get into that information when you can turn around and hack 100 of their clients because they got that information? So I know for us, we make a promise to all of our clients that we're running assessments, we're self-assessing. We actually have a third-party company assess us every month, if not quarterly, to make sure that we're adhering to the promises we make to our client. We're also assessing our clients, talking to them, educating them where we can, and bring those things to the front row. I know today, anybody who's attended the webinar, they have an opportunity. The first 5 people reach out to us, submit a form. We'll be providing a free cybersecurity and a risk assessment. That's about 30 some odd different reports and data that we collect and gather. That's a great way to figure out where your company stands digitally, how that stands up against your compliances, HIPAA, ISO, NIST, CMMC, any of those compliances that we have to go to. So that one's super important. If anybody wants to walk down that road, feel free to reach out to us. Like we said, first 5 people in, these things take a while for us to run. They're about a week-long process. Not only do we run these reports, we actually review them, and we'll sit and go through them with you. The largest report I think I've ever created was 2,300 pages. It took me 4 hours to go through it with the client. I was a potential client at the time who became a client. And it took me like a good solid day to go through it. So I highly recommend it. Typically we charge for this. It's about a $500 charge. But like right now we're offering this for the first 5 people who act now kind of a situation. So looking to see who's interested. On that note, Rocky, I think we're pretty much done. Maybe we can go to questions and see if anybody had any questions out there.
I think we're ready for that.
I like it. All right. So, it looks like, what is the difference between recommended security and regulated compliance? Okay, I like this one. And Rocky, I'll let you go after me. So recommended security is that, right? We're recommending that you put these things in place and they will protect you in the long run and protect your employees, your business, your money, right? It's a hard recommend. You should have it. Regulated compliance means that there is backlash to not following the compliance because either you've leaked data, you've caused an attack that resulted in sensitive information being released, and you didn't adhere to the compliancy. That can mean shutting down a business, a loss of a license, hefty fines, which may result in the loss of a business. So if it's regulated or it's a compliancy and you're not following it, you are definitely setting yourself up for a very hurtful day or a very hurtful rest of your life. I know, Rocky, you probably can add a little bit more to that.
Yeah, security and compliance complementing each other, even though they are different. The main difference is the security is defined by a risk, and the success of a security is gauged based on the ability of the organization to protect against the threats. And compliance is assessed based on, like you said, the prescribed requirements of the regulation. So combining the two just makes your environment that much stronger. You're adding layers of defense to keep the cybersecurity people or cyber criminals out, excuse me. So the best practice is to have both of them work hand in hand together.
Yeah, and then I think it also, with the reason why there's regulated compliance is it's so that businesses like medical facilities, businesses that have specific manufacturing, they are consistently building the same thing over and over again. In this sense, it's protecting of the data, right? It's not necessarily a widget that they're manufacturing, but it's the consistency that every employee is taught, every employee adheres to the compliancy, and everybody's security is the exact same across the board. I think that's another good answer to the recommended security versus regulated compliance. Let's see if there's any other questions out there. Okay, I got one personally. It says, does CAS secure everything? So that's compliancy as a service. Nobody's going to tell you that everything is covered 100% because that's opening themselves up for liability. If I had my attorney standing behind me, he would be making sure that I said that nobody can 100% guarantee securability. Does it help mitigate it? Absolutely. Does it help your threat window shrink? Yes, it does. Does it mean that one day you're not going to have that one employee in the payroll department accidentally click a link? It's going to happen. If you train them right, that potential should go down astronomically. But if it does happen and you've been working with somebody or you've been listening to them when they make recommended security, or if you have specific compliances that maybe just their computer gets infected or just their computer is affected by whatever they did and the rest of the business is just fine. That mitigates your risk. That mitigates the problem. On that one too, Rocky, you have anything to add?
Yeah, the CAS service does not remove a risk or the obligation from the private company to ensure that the compliance requirements are in place. It, like you said, it helps with the protection and helps it, but there's no way you can be 100% covered on any of it. You know, you got to have the documentation. If you're not documented, it really didn't happen as far as compliance goes.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's one of the things that I tell my guys: if the ticket doesn't exist, I can't protect you. If a client comes to me and says that we did something or didn't do anything, and there's our compliance is we always have a ticket, right? If I don't have one, I can't protect my employee. I have to side with the client and fix whatever the issue may be. So they understand that like a ticket is created every time. That's a super basic one, right? Or an instance for us. And I guess maybe for this one, Rocky, another one came through. How does compliance as a service help me manage my compliance efforts?
All right. Well, according to Statistica, a number of data breaches in the United States have amounted to about 1,240 some, with over 446.5 million records exposed. So a lot of these compromises are the information, especially when you consider the potential impact on the operating costs and the loss of trust that you get from your customers. It can severely help or hinder your standing.
Yeah, I think to that one, I've seen this happen a couple of times in my industry, right? You have a business owner, they get a bad reputation as an MSP or an IT provider. They change the business name. Rather, because their business has gone down or it's almost shut their doors because they've gotten such a bad name. They change the name, they start back up, but what they failed to do was plug what the actual problem was. What did we do to get the bad name? How did we get that bad name? And they perpetuate it. So there's a couple of businesses, I'm not going to name names, of course, in our area that I know of. One of them has changed their name 6 times in the last 14 years. I've been doing this for 23. I'm gonna date myself now. 23 years. Nobody doing the math. I'm super young. So for 23 years, I've never gone through a business name change. I've only ever gone through a logo change, and that's just because we kind of grew up and thought we had to have a better look and feel, right? Name changes typically, that's one way to protect yourself and rebuild your brand. But those are things to look for, especially if all of a sudden the same owner shows up and you're like, I thought I fired you, and I was talking to this new company, and you're like, surprise, same guy. So it's things like that, right? Like, you got to be making sure that everybody's on the up and up and everybody's providing, good services. And the only way you can do that is by having employees well trained and they hit their compliances. Let's see if there's any other questions come through. I haven't seen any other ones come directly to me yet. Rocky, do you have any that came directly to you?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I know in the best interest of everybody's time, I know we try and keep these down to a minimum amount of time because we love to have everybody sit through them and watch. And I'm pretty sure I could probably talk for the next hour, but who wants to listen to that? Rocky, I'm going to let you get back to your day. Everybody else who's attending, I want to say thank you so much for making it out to another one of our webinars. If you've attended them before, if you haven't, welcome for your first time. If you like it, great. Please recommend them. We're going to be doing these webinars about every other month. We'll be announcing it on every form of social media that we possibly can. And we're always trying to come up with new and exciting things. Typically, I come up with our topics based on what I'm running into in the real world. Compliancy has been a huge thing for me as of late. Cybersecurity policies are, I think, my next biggest thing that I'm always having to deal with. And I'm always talking to people about doing network and security audits. I want to thank Kaseya for coming out today. Rocky, it was awesome having you here. I know a lot of the compliancy tools, a lot of the documentation you guys have out there is awesome. I know a lot of IT service providers are using them. So, hey, thank you for the tools that you guys provide. Thank you for your time today, Rocky. It's nice. Everybody, thank you for attending. You guys have a good one. We'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you so much.